The blood tasted like copper and shame as it dripped from Elena Norton's split lip onto the dusty floorboards of the trading post, and she wondered if this was how her mother had felt in those final moments before the fever took her, helpless and small, in a world that demanded silence from women who dared to have opinions. It was late spring in 1878, and Circleville, Utah was a town clinging to the edge of civilization like a burr on worn leather. The settlement sat in the high desert valley, surrounded by red rock formations that glowed like embers at sunset. Elena had arrived 3 weeks prior with her aunt and uncle, refugees from a failed farm in Missouri where drought had turned the soil to dust and creditors had turned sympathetic smiles into threats. Her uncle, Marcus Norton, had inherited a small plot of land from a distant cousin, and they had traveled west with nothing but hope and a wagon full of memories. That hope had curdled quickly. Marcus Norton was a hard man made harder by failure, and his wife Constance had learned long ago to keep her eyes down and her mouth shut. They expected the same from Elena, who at 22 years old had already buried a fiancé to consumption and watched her parents lose everything before disease claimed them both. She had promised herself after burying Jacob that she would never again be voiceless, never again let fear keep words trapped in her throat when they needed to be spoken. But promises made in grief were difficult to keep when survival depended on keeping the peace. The trading post belonged to a man named Cyrus Webb, who ran it with his 2 sons. The younger one, Daniel, had a mean streak that showed itself in how he treated the horses, yanking their bits until they bled at the corners of their mouths. The older one, Thomas, simply looked away whenever his brother's cruelty surfaced, which Elena thought might be worse than participation. She had been standing near the counter holding a list her aunt had written in shaky handwriting when Daniel Webb started talking about the Paiute family that lived in a small camp east of town. His words were cruel and casual, the kind of hatred that had become so commonplace it passed without comment. He talked about running them off, about how they were probably stealing cattle even though everyone knew the cattle had wandered into a canyon and gotten stuck there until the ranchers retrieved them. Elena had not meant to speak. The words simply emerged, quiet but clear in the momentary silence that fell over the store. That is not true. Those people have done nothing wrong. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the warmth of the day outside. Daniel Webb turned slowly, his face registering first surprise and then something darker. Marcus Norton's hand had clamped on her arm immediately, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Apologize," he hissed. But Elena, foolish with principle or perhaps simply tired of swallowing injustice, had lifted her chin. "I will not apologize for speaking the truth." The slap had come from her uncle, fast and hard across her face. When she stumbled, catching herself on a barrel of flour, he had grabbed her by the hair and struck her again. The world had blurred then, pain and shock mingling with the horrible realization that no one in the store was going to intervene. Constance stood frozen by the door, her face pale, but her body motionless. The Webb brothers watched with expressions ranging from satisfaction to indifference. When Marcus finally released her, shoving her toward the door, Elena tasted blood and felt something shift inside her chest. Not breaking exactly, transforming. The girl who had believed in goodness and fairness was burning away, leaving something harder behind. "Get home," Marcus snarled, "and pray I do not tell you what I think of mouthy women who shame their family in public." Elena walked out into the bright afternoon, blinking against the sunlight that seemed too cheerful for the moment. Her face throbbed with each heartbeat, and she could feel her left eye starting to swell. The main street of Circleville stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings separated by expanses of red dirt. A few people moved about their business, and she felt their eyes on her even when they pretended not to look. She had made it perhaps 20 yards from the trading post when she heard boots on the wooden walkway behind her. "Miss?" The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked its owner as someone from further south. Elena did not turn around, did not want whoever it was to see her face clearly. to witness her humiliation up close. "Miss, please wait." Something in the tone made her pause despite herself. She turned slowly, keeping her head slightly lowered, and found herself looking at a man she had noticed around town but never spoken to. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell to just above his collar. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days but was well cared for. His face was striking in an unconventional way. All strong angles and serious eyes that at the moment held something she could not quite name. "I am fine," she managed, though her voice came out thick and strange through her swelling lip. He stopped a respectful distance away, and she saw his jaw tighten as he took in the damage to her face. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there with his hands loose at his sides and something working behind his eyes like he was calculating odds or weighing options. "My name is Samuel Kincaid," he finally said. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Small operation, just me and a couple of hired hands during busy seasons." Elena nodded slightly, unsure why he was telling her this, unsure what response was appropriate when your face was swelling like overripe fruit, and a stranger was introducing himself in the middle of the street. "I was in the trading post," Samuel continued, and something flickered across his face. Anger, she realized. Not at her, but for her. "I heard what you said about the Paiute family." "Then you know I should have kept quiet," Elena said, the words coming out bitter. "No." The word was firm, absolute. Samuel took a step closer, and Elena noticed his eyes were a striking gray-green like sage after rain. "No, you should not have kept quiet. You were right. And speaking the truth should never earn that kind of response." Something cracked in Elena's chest, some defensive wall she had been hastily constructing. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in her life, buried enough people, lost enough to know that tears changed nothing. "It does not matter if I was right," she said quietly. "This is how things are. It matters." Samuel's voice was intense now, commanding her attention in a way that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with conviction. "Your voice matters here, in this town, in this moment. What you said needed saying, and the fact that it cost you something does not make it less true or less important." Elena stared at him, this stranger with his earnest eyes and his radical notion that her words held value. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let those words sink into the broken places inside her and take root. But belief was a luxury she could not afford when she depended on her aunt and uncle for food and shelter. "Thank you," she said finally, because he seemed to need some acknowledgement. "That is kind of you to say." Samuel studied her for another moment, and she saw him make some internal decision. "I need help at the ranch. Someone who can cook for the hands when we bring on extra workers, help with the garden, maybe assist with some of the lighter work. The pay would be fair, and there is a small cabin on the property that needs occupancy. It belonged to the previous owner's mother before she passed." Elena felt her heart lurch. Was he offering her employment? A way out of her uncle's house? "I cannot," she said, even as every fiber of her being screamed to say yes. "My uncle would never allow it." "You are over 21 years of age, I assume?" Samuel's eyes searched her face. "I am 22. "Then legally you can make your own decisions. I know that is easier said than done when family is involved, but the offer stands. If you want work, if you want a place where speaking your mind does not get you struck, my ranch can provide that." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Elena knew what would happen if she accepted. Marcus would call her ungrateful, a whore, every ugly name he could think of. The town would talk. Constance would weep and claim Elena had broken her heart. But the alternative was returning to that house, to walking on eggshells and swallowing truths until they poisoned her from the inside. I need to think, she heard herself say. Samuel nodded slowly. Of course. I am in town most Saturdays for supplies. You can find me here if you decide you want to take the offer, or send word through the livery stable. The owner, George Mitchell, knows how to reach me. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. Samuel, please. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture of respect that felt almost foreign after the violence of the trading post. I hope to hear from you, Miss Norton, and I hope that Lip heals quickly. He turned and walked away then, his long stride carrying him down the street toward the livery stable. Elena watched him go, one hand coming up unconsciously to touch her swollen face. Her fingers came away with fresh blood, and she stared at the red stain for a moment before wiping it on her skirt. The walk back to her uncle's property took 30 minutes, the house sitting on the southern edge of town where the desert began its earnest takeover of the landscape. It was a simple structure, wood and stone cobbled together by someone who knew enough about construction to make it functional, but lacked the skill to make it comfortable. Elena let herself in through the back door, hoping to reach the small room she shared with storage boxes before her aunt saw her. No such luck. Constance was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes with mechanical efficiency. She looked up when Elena entered and her face crumpled. "Oh, child," she whispered, setting down the knife and wiping her hands on her apron. "I am fine," Elena said, the lie transparent but necessary. "Let me get some cool water and a cloth." Constance moved to the basin, her movements quick and nervous. She returned with a damp rag and gestured for Elena to sit at the rough-hewn table. The water stung against her split lip, but the coolness helped with the swelling. Constance worked in silence for a few minutes before speaking again. "You should not have said anything." "I know." "Marcus was humiliated. You made him look like he could not control his own family." Elena pulled back from the cloth, meeting her aunt's eyes directly. "I made him look like what he is. A man who would rather beat a woman than stand up for what is right." Constance flinched as though she had been struck. "You do not understand how things work. We depend on the goodwill of this community. If people think we are troublemakers, if they think we do not know our place, they will make our lives impossible here." "And what place is that exactly?" Elena felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. "On our knees? Silent while others are maligned and mistreated? My mother did not raise me to be a coward." "Your mother is dead," Constance said, her voice suddenly harsh. "And if she had been less stubborn, less insistent on speaking her mind to your father's creditors, perhaps the stress would not have weakened her enough for the fever to take hold." "Pride is expensive, Elena. Sometimes it costs everything." The words hit like another slap, and Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I am going to my room." "Marcus will expect an apology when he returns." "Then Marcus will be disappointed." Elena walked to the small back room before her aunt could respond. The space was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a trunk, with one small window that looked out over scrubland. She sat on the bed, her body finally acknowledging the trembling that had been threatening since the trading post, but still she did not cry. Instead, she thought about Samuel Kincaid and his offer, turning it over in her mind like a prospector examining ore for traces of gold. Could she really leave? Simply walk away from the only family she had left? Regardless of how toxic that relationship had become, the social consequences would be severe. Women did not live alone on ranches with unmarried men, not without inviting scandal and ruin. But then what reputation did she have to protect? She was an orphan dependent on relatives who saw her as a burden. She had no prospects for marriage, no particular skills that made her valuable in the traditional sense. What she did have was a spine and a conscience, and apparently those were dangerous things for a woman to possess in Circleville, Utah. The decision crystallized slowly over the next 3 days. Marcus returned that first evening in a rage, shouting about respect and obedience until his voice went hoarse. Elena stood silent through the tirade, her face still swollen, and refused to apologize. When he raised his hand again, Constance had actually stepped between them, perhaps finding some limit to what she would witness. She has learned her lesson, Constance said quickly. There is no need for more. She will not speak out of turn again. Marcus had lowered his hand but pointed at Elena with a finger that shook with fury. You are fortunate your aunt has a softer heart than I do. But understand this. You live under my roof. You follow my rules. Another incident like that and you will find yourself on the street with nothing but the clothes on your back. Am I clear? Perfectly, Elena had responded, her voice flat and emotionless. She spent those days planning. She had a small amount of money, coins saved from doing sewing work for some of the town women. Not much, but enough for immediate necessities if she was careful. She owned little in the way of possessions, which would make leaving easier. Most importantly, she observed the patterns of the household, noting when Marcus and Constance were most distracted, when she might slip away without immediate notice. On Saturday morning, she woke before dawn. Her face had healed considerably. The swelling reduced to a slight puffiness around her left eye, the bruises fading to yellow-green. She dressed in her sturdiest clothes and packed her few belongings into a carpet bag that had belonged to her mother. At the bottom, she placed the small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, the only photograph she owned. She left a note on her bed, brief and to the point. I have found employment. Do not look for me, Elena. The walk into town felt longer than usual, weighted with the enormity of what she was doing. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of orange and pink, and the air held the coolness of night mixed with the promise of warmth to come. Circleville was quiet at this hour, just a few early risers beginning their days. The livery stable was open, George Mitchell already at work mucking out stalls. He was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes that had seen enough of life to no longer be surprised by much. Miss Norton, he greeted her, leaning on his pitchfork. You're out early. I need to get a message to Samuel Kincaid, Elena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Is he in town today? George studied her for a moment, taking in the carpet bag and the determination in her posture. A slow smile crossed his face. As it happens, I expect him within the hour. He usually arrives early when he comes for supplies. You're welcome to wait here if you would like. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. I would appreciate that. George showed her to a small office at the back of the stable, a cramped space that smelled of leather and hay but was blessedly private. She sat on a wooden stool and tried to calm her racing thoughts. What if Samuel had changed his mind? What if the offer had been made in the heat of the moment and he regretted it now? What if this entire plan was the foolish impulse of a woman too proud for her own good? But no, she had heard the conviction in his voice, had seen the anger in his eyes when he looked at her injuries. Whatever else Samuel Kincaid might be, he was a man who meant what he said. The sun was fully up when she heard George's voice outside the office, followed by another deeper voice that she recognized. Someone to see you, Sam, in the office. Elena stood as the door opened, and Samuel filled the doorway. He wore different clothes than their last meeting, but the same well-worn hat. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, then dropped to the carpet bag at her feet. Miss Norton, he said carefully. I would like to accept your offer, Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady. The employment at your ranch, if it still stands. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a tension releasing. It stands. Absolutely. It stands. I have little in the way of experience, Vinay, she continued, needing him to understand what he was getting. But I am a hard worker, and I learn quickly. I can cook basic meals, tend a garden, handle cleaning and laundry. I'm willing to do whatever is needed. That is more than enough. Samuel stepped into the office, removing his hat and turning it in his hands. I should be clear about something, though. The arrangement I described, it is all above board. The cabin is separate from the main house, a good 100 yards away. You would have your privacy, and I would expect you to maintain clear boundaries. I know how this might look to people, a single woman working for a bachelor, but I give you my word that your reputation and safety are important to me. Elena felt a knot of tension she had not realized she was carrying begin to loosen. I believe you. When would you want to start? Today, if possible. I left a note for my aunt and uncle, but I would prefer to be gone before they realize I have made this decision. My uncle has a temper, as you witnessed." Samuel's jaw tightened at the reference. "Understood. I have a few supplies to gather, but we can leave within the hour. Is there anything else you need from town?" "No, I have everything with me." They made an odd pair leaving Circleville that morning, Samuel driving a wagon loaded with supplies, and Elena sitting beside him, her carpet bag clutched on her lap. A few people watched them pass, and Elena saw the speculation in their eyes, the questions forming. By nightfall, the whole town would be talking. By tomorrow, the rumors would be elaborate and damning. But as the town fell away behind them and the landscape opened into rolling high desert punctuated by red rock formations and scattered juniper trees, Elena found she did not care as much as she thought she would. There was a strange freedom in having nothing left to lose. "Thank you," she said, after they had traveled in silence for nearly 20 minutes, "for the offer and for not requiring more explanation than I gave." Samuel glanced at her, his profile sharp against the brightening sky. "Everyone deserves a chance to start over. And I meant what I said before. Your voice matters, not just to me, but in general. The world needs people willing to speak uncomfortable truths, even when it costs them something." "You seem very certain about that." "I had a sister," Samuel said, and Elena heard the past tense like a warning bell. "Caroline. She was 3 years younger than me, sharp as a tack and stubborn as a mule. She saw injustice everywhere and could not help but call it out. My father used to say she was born without the sense God gave a goose, but I always admired her for it." "What happened to her?" Elena asked softly. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins, even as tension showed in his shoulders. "She fell in love with a man my father did not approve of. Mexican fellow, decent as they come, but wrong in my father's eyes. When she refused to end the relationship, my father threw her out, told her she was no daughter of his, that she was dead to the family. That is horrible. It gets worse." Samuel's voice was carefully controlled. "She and her fellow Juan, they tried to make a go of it. But there was an incident in the town where they settled, some men who did not like the idea of them being together. They beat Juan badly enough that he never really recovered. Caroline nursed him for 2 years before he died. By then she had nothing. No money, no family willing to take her in. She got sick that winter, and by the time I found out where she was and made the journey, she was already gone." "I am so sorry," Elena said, the words inadequate but genuine. "I was serving as a deputy at the time, doing work I thought mattered, but I could not even protect my own sister." Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "I quit that job, sold my share of my father's ranch back to him and came out here. Bought this land with the idea that I would make it a place where people did not have to choose between speaking their conscience and having a home. I know that sounds idealistic and probably naive, but it is what I want." Elena sat with this information, understanding now why he had intervened when he had no obligation to do so. She was not Caroline, but perhaps helping her was a way of honoring his sister's memory. "It is not naive," she said finally. "It is necessary. And for what it is worth, I think your sister would be proud of what you're trying to build." Samuel looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, an understanding that they were both people shaped by loss and determined not to let it break them entirely. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Elena felt her breath catch slightly. It was modest by many standards, but beautiful in its simplicity. The main house was built of local stone and rough-cut timber, sturdy and functional, with a wide porch that would provide shade during the brutal summer heat. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings, all well-maintained. Corrals held perhaps 24 horses, and she could see cattle in the distance grazing on scrub land that somehow supported them. The cabin Samuel had mentioned sat off to the east, partially shaded by a large cottonwood tree that must have been growing there for decades. It was small, just 2 rooms from what she could see, but it looked solid and private. "It needs some work," Samuel said as he drew the wagon to a stop near the main house, "but the roof is sound, And there is a stove for cooking and heat. I had one of my hands clear it out last week and make sure everything was functional. It looks wonderful, Elena said honestly. Samuel helped her down from the wagon. His hand warm and calloused against hers, he grabbed her carpet bag and gestured toward the cabin. Let me show you around, and then I will let you get settled. We can discuss the specifics of the work arrangement over supper if that suits you. The cabin's interior was dim and cool, a welcome respite from the climbing temperature outside. The main room held a simple kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a small table with 2 chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair positioned near a window. The second room was a bedroom, barely large enough for the bed frame and dresser it contained, but private and clean. The previous owner's mother lived here for almost 20 years, Samuel explained. She was particular about keeping things nice. When she passed, her family took most of the furniture and personal items, but they left the basics. I can bring over additional supplies if you need them. This is more than adequate, Elena said, setting her carpet bag on the bed. It is perfect, actually. Samuel lingered in the doorway, seeming uncertain now that they were here. I should let you get settled. The main house is always open if you need anything, but I will respect your privacy. Generally, I rise before dawn, handle the morning chores, and come in for breakfast around 7. If you are amenable to preparing meals, I would appreciate breakfast and supper. Lunch is usually something simple I can handle myself. That sounds reasonable. As for other work, it is mostly maintaining the house, the garden when we get it planted, and helping out where you are comfortable during busier times. We bring on extra hands during roundup and branding, and having someone who can provide meals makes everything run smoother. I understand. Samuel nodded, put his hat back on, and stepped toward the door. Then he paused, turning back to look at her. Elena, I want you to know that you are safe here. Not just physically, though that is important. But I meant what I said about your voice mattering. You do not have to agree with everything I say or think. You are allowed to have opinions and express them. I hired you because you were brave enough to speak up for people who could not speak for themselves, not in spite of it. The use of her first name, intimate without being presumptuous, did something strange to Elena's equilibrium. Thank you, Samuel. That means more than I can properly express. He nodded again and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Elena stood in the center of the small cabin, surrounded by silence and possibility, and finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She had done it. She had walked away from a situation that was slowly suffocating her and stepped into something unknown but infinitely more hopeful. The tears came then, but they were not tears of pain or sorrow. They were the release of tension held too long, the physical manifestation of relief and fear and cautious optimism all tangled together. She let herself cry for a few minutes, then wiped her face, unpacked her few belongings, and set about making the cabin truly hers. That evening she walked to the main house as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Samuel had told her to come around 6, and she arrived to find him on the porch, washing up in a basin. He had removed his hat and vest, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle from physical labor. Good timing, he said, drying his hands on a towel. I hope you've found the cabin comfortable. Very much so. Come on in, I will show you the kitchen, and we can figure out what makes sense for meals. The interior of the main house was masculine but not unwelcoming. The furniture was well made and practical, the space clean in the way of someone who knew the value of order. He led her to a kitchen that was surprisingly well equipped with a large stove, ample counter space, and organized storage. I do not claim to be a great cook, Samuel admitted, but I have learned to manage. There is a root cellar out back, and I keep it stocked with basics. We have chickens for eggs, and I butcher a steer twice a year for beef. There is a man in town who sells pork, and I trade for that when needed. Elena moved around the space, noting the quality of the pots and pans, the sharp knives, the organization that spoke of someone who respected his tools. This is a good kitchen. I can work well here. I am glad to hear it. Samuel leaned against the counter, watching her with those serious gray-green eyes. I thought for tonight we could keep things simple. Maybe some eggs and bread, if that suits you. That suits me fine. They worked together in companionable silence, Elena scrambling eggs while Samuel sliced bread and set out butter and preserves. It felt strangely domestic, this easy cooperation between near strangers, and Elena found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. They ate at the kitchen table rather than the more formal dining room, and conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Samuel asked about her life before Circleville, and Elena found herself sharing more than she had intended. She told him about her parents' farm in Missouri, about her fiancé Jacob, and how consumption had stolen him over the course of a terrible winter. She spoke about the drought and the debt, about watching her father's spirit break under the weight of failure, about her mother's fever, and the helpless rage of watching someone slip away. I promised myself at her graveside that I would not live small, Elena said quietly, that I would not let fear silence me the way it silenced her. But keeping that promise has proven more difficult than I anticipated. The hardest promises usually are. Samuel refilled her water glass from a pitcher. But from what I have seen, you're doing a fair job of keeping it. Speaking up in that trading post took courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they look the same from certain angles. Elena laughed, surprising herself. When was the last time she had laughed? That is a diplomatic way of putting it. I have my moments. Samuel's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile, the expression transforming his serious face into something warmer. What about your plans for the future? Beyond this job, I mean. What do you want? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Everyone had assumptions about what women wanted, a husband, children, security. But no one asked. I want to matter, she said slowly, working out the thought as she spoke. I want my life to mean something beyond just existing. I do not need to do great things or be remembered by history, but I want to know that I made a difference, even a small one, that I left the world slightly better than I found it. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. That is a worthy goal, and for what it is worth, I think you are already doing that, standing up for those Paiute folks, that mattered. Coming here despite what people will say, that matters too. You are showing that there is another way to live. What about you? Elena asked, turning the question back on him. What do you want? Honestly, I want to build something lasting. This ranch, it is more than just a way to make a living. I want it to be proof that you can succeed without compromising your principles, that you can treat people decently and still make a go of it. Maybe that is naive too, but I have to believe it is possible. I do not think it is naive at all, Elena said. I think it is necessary. If more people thought that way, the world would be vastly different. They talked late into the evening, the conversation ranging from serious topics to lighter ones, from shared beliefs to silly stories from their childhoods. Elena learned that Samuel had grown up on a ranch in Texas, that he had served briefly as a lawman before disillusionment set in, that he loved horses more than was probably reasonable, and had a deep appreciation for the stark beauty of the desert landscape. Samuel learned that Elena had taught herself to read advanced texts by borrowing books from a kind school teacher, that she had a talent for mathematics that had gone largely unused, that she secretly loved thunderstorms and the smell of rain on dry earth, even though both were rare in this climate. When Elena finally returned to her cabin, the moon was high and bright, casting silver light across the landscape. She felt exhausted but more hopeful than she had in months. This place, this arrangement, it felt right in a way that nothing had since her parents died. The next weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Elena woke early, prepared breakfast in the main house kitchen, and had it ready when Samuel came in from his morning chores. They ate together, discussing plans for the day, and then Elena would clean up before tackling whatever tasks needed attention. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and began organizing the somewhat chaotic storage areas. In the afternoon, she worked on planting a garden, studying the soil, and researching what grew well in this climate. Samuel was a good employer, treating her with consistent respect and never making demands that were unreasonable. He paid her at the end of the first week, the amount more than fair, and insisted she keep accounts of any household expenses so he could reimburse her. But more than that, he was good company. They fell into the habit of having supper together most evenings, the meals growing more elaborate as Elena experimented with the supplies available. They talked about everything and nothing, debated philosophy and politics, shared stories and dreams. Elena found herself looking forward to those evening conversations more than she probably should, found herself watching the clock as the afternoon wore on, anticipating the moment when Samuel would come in from the day's work. She was careful not to examine those feelings too closely. Samuel was her employer, and she was his employee. More than that, she was a woman whose reputation was likely already in tatters thanks to this living arrangement. Getting romantically involved would be both inappropriate and foolish, but the heart rarely consulted the head about such matters. It was late June when Marcus Norton showed up at the ranch. Elena was in the garden fighting with stubborn soil and trying to coax vegetables from ground that seemed determined to remain inhospitable when she heard the wagon. She looked up, shading her eyes against the bright afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized her uncle's rigid posture. Samuel emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound, and positioned himself between the wagon and where Elena stood. She appreciated the protective instinct, but stood and walked forward. Whatever was about to happen, she would not hide behind anyone. "Uncle Marcus," she greeted coolly. Her uncle climbed down from the wagon with jerky movements, his face red with either heat or anger or both. "You will gather your things and come home immediately. This foolishness has gone on long enough." "I am not coming home," Elena said calmly. "I have employment here and a place to live. I am an adult making my own decisions." "You are a disgrace," Marcus spat. "Living here with a man, unmarried, acting like some kind of common whore. The whole town is talking about it. You have shamed your aunt and me beyond repair." Samuel took a step forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is enough. Miss Norton is employed here in a completely legitimate capacity. She has her own residence and is treated with nothing but respect. If the town chooses to make something ugly out of an honest working arrangement, that says more about them than it does about her." "I was not speaking to you," Marcus snarled. "You are on my property," Samuel responded, and there was steel in his voice now. "And you will speak respectfully to everyone here, or you will leave." Marcus turned his glare back to Elena. "If you do not come home now, you are no longer part of this family. Your aunt is beside herself, and I will not have you destroying what little standing we have in this community." Elena felt a pang at the mention of her aunt, who had shown her at least some kindness, but it was not enough to change her mind. "Then I suppose I'm no longer part of the family. I'm sorry if that hurts Aunt Constance, but I cannot live the way you demand. I will not be silent and compliant just to make you comfortable." "You foolish, stupid girl," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "You think you are so principled, so righteous, but the world does not care about your principles. It will chew you up and spit you out, and when it does, do not come crying to me for help. I would never ask you for anything." Elena said quietly. "I learned exactly what your help costs, and the price is too high." For a moment she thought Marcus might try to grab her, might attempt to force her into his wagon. But Samuel shifted his stance slightly, and whatever Marcus saw in his expression made him reconsider. "You will regret this," Marcus said instead. "Both of you. This town does not look kindly on people who flout decent society." "Then perhaps decent society needs to re-examine its values," Samuel said. "Now I believe you have said your piece. I will ask you to leave my property." Marcus stared at them both for another long moment, his face working through a series of expressions. Finally, he climbed back into his wagon and took up the reins. "When this all falls apart, remember that you were warned. And Elena, as far as I am concerned, you are dead to me. Do not expect me to acknowledge you if our paths cross." He drove off without waiting for a response, the wagon kicking up dust as it bumped along the rough track back toward town. Elena stood watching until he disappeared from view, her hands clenched at her sides. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked gently. I think so. Elena took a shaky breath. I knew he would likely come eventually, but I had hoped he would simply accept my decision. Men like that rarely accept anything that challenges their sense of control. Samuel's hand hovered near her shoulder, not quite touching but offering comfort through proximity. I meant what I said. You are safe here, and no one is going to force you to leave or compromise who you are. Elena turned to look at him. This man who had given her sanctuary without asking for anything in return, who defended her against her own family, who saw value in her voice when others wanted it silenced. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a combination of gratitude and attraction and something deeper that she was not ready to name. Thank you, she said softly, for standing with me. Always, Samuel replied, and the simple word felt like a promise. The encounter with Marcus cast a shadow over the next few days, but Elena refused to let it derail the life she was building. She threw herself into her work with renewed determination, as if proving through productivity that she had made the right choice. The garden began to respond to her efforts, tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil like flags of victory. The house gleamed from her attentions, organized and welcoming. Samuel seemed to sense her need to stay busy and found additional projects for her. Together they repaired a section of fence, painted the porch, and reorganized the barn storage area. The work was physical and satisfying, and Elena felt herself growing stronger both in body and spirit. It was during one of these projects, as they worked side by side cleaning years of accumulated debris from a storage shed, that Samuel spoke about his past relationship experiences. I was engaged once, he said, the words coming out of nowhere. About 5 years ago to a woman named Margaret. She was the daughter of the ranch owner I worked for in Texas. Elena paused in her sweeping, curious, but not wanting to push. She was beautiful and accomplished, everything you were supposed to want in a wife, Samuel continued. But when I told her I was thinking about quitting law enforcement and moving west to start my own place, she was horrified. Said it was beneath her to live in some primitive territory, that I was throwing away my potential. What happened? I realized that she did not love me so much as she loved the idea of who she thought I would become. A successful lawman, maybe eventually a sheriff or marshal, someone important. When I chose a different path, one that aligned with my actual values rather than ambition, she could not accept it. We ended the engagement, and I have not seen her since. Her loss, Elena said, and meant it. Samuel smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. That is generous of you to say, but I think in the end it was mutual. We wanted different things out of life. She's probably married to some successful rancher now, hosting dinner parties and being exactly who she wanted to be. And you are here, building something that matters to you? Exactly. Samuel set down the crate he had been moving and looked at her directly. I tell you this because I want you to understand that I know what it is like to be told you are wrong for following your conscience, that you should want what everyone expects you to want. Margaret used to get so frustrated with me when I would talk about fairness and justice, said I was too idealistic for my own good. I do not think you can be too idealistic, Elena said. The world needs people who believe things can be better, who are willing to work toward that even when it is difficult. That is exactly what I think about you, Samuel said quietly. You are one of the few people I have met who actually lives according to their principles regardless of the cost. That is rare, Elena, and valuable. The air between them felt charged suddenly, weighted with things unspoken. Elena found herself very aware of how close they were standing, of the intensity in Samuel's gaze, of her own racing heartbeat. Samuel, she started, not sure what she was going to say. He stepped back slightly, breaking the moment. We should finish up here before the light fails. I want to show you something after supper, if you're willing. Of course, Elena managed, trying to steady her breathing. They completed the work in a silence that was not quite comfortable but not entirely awkward either, both of them thinking about the conversation and what it might mean. When they finally finished and returned to the house to clean up, Elena felt off balance, like the world had shifted slightly and she was still finding her footing. Supper that evening was a quiet affair, both of them making small talk, but avoiding anything too substantive. When they finished, Samuel stood and gestured toward the door. "Come on, I want to show you the sunset from the North Ridge. It is something special." They saddled 2 horses, Samuel patiently helping Elena since she was still somewhat inexperienced with the process. Then they rode north, following a gentle slope upward through scrubland dotted with sage and juniper. The ridge was not particularly high, but it offered an unobstructed view in all directions. They dismounted and stood side by side, watching as the sun descended toward the western horizon. The sky caught fire, brilliant oranges and reds and purples painting across the clouds. The landscape below glowed in the golden light, the red rocks seeming to burn from within. "This is why I chose this place," Samuel said softly. "Every evening this happens. The world just transforms into something extraordinary. It reminds me that there is beauty in harsh places, that difficult conditions can produce something stunning." Elena stood transfixed, watching the light show unfold. But more than the sunset, she was aware of the man beside her, of his quiet strength and steady presence. Somewhere along the way, in the weeks of working together and talking together and building something that felt like trust, her feelings had evolved beyond gratitude and respect into something far more complicated. "Elena," Samuel said, and she turned to find him looking at her instead of the sunset. "I need to say something, and I hope I am not overstepping or making you uncomfortable." Her heart began to pound. "All right." "These past weeks, getting to know you, working alongside you, I have found myself feeling things I did not expect to feel. You are intelligent and brave and principled in ways that humble me. You challenge me to think differently, to be better. And somewhere in all of that, I started to care for you as more than just an employee or even a friend." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "I know the timing is complicated," Samuel continued, the words coming faster now as if he needed to get them all out. "I know there are power dynamics at play with you working for me, and I know your reputation is already suffering because of this arrangement. The last thing I want is to make things harder for you or put you in a position where you feel obligated to reciprocate because I am your employer. But I also could not keep pretending what I feel is neutral when it is anything but." "Samuel," Elena said, finding her voice, "I feel the same way." He blinked, surprise crossing his face. "You do?" "I have been trying not to," she admitted, with a small laugh. "Trying to tell myself it was just gratitude, or the relief of being safe, or loneliness. But that is not what this is. I care for you deeply. You have given me more than just employment and a place to live. You have given me back my voice, my sense of self. You see me as a whole person, not just a woman who needs to be controlled or managed. How could I not develop feelings for you?" Samuel took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His touch was warm, slightly rough from work, and infinitely careful. "I want to court you properly. I want to do this right, not have people say you fell into my arms because you had no other options." "Let them say what they want," Elena said, leaning into his touch. "I have spent too much energy worrying about what people think. The only opinion that matters to me now is my own, and I know my own heart." "Are you certain?" Samuel's eyes searched hers. "Because once we do this, there is no going back. The town will assume the worst regardless of the truth." "I am absolutely certain," Elena said firmly. "I would rather live honestly and face judgment than hide what I feel to appease people who have already decided to think poorly of me." Samuel smiled then, a brilliant expression of pure joy, and leaned down to press his forehead against hers. "You are extraordinary. Do you know that?" "You make me feel that way," Elena whispered. "May I kiss you?" "Please." His lips met hers gently at first, a question and an answer all at once. Elena's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened slowly, building in intensity as weeks of restrained attraction found release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the sun had fully set, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "We should head back," Samuel said reluctantly. "It will be full dark soon, and the path is tricky in low light." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but Samuel reached across the space between their horses to hold her hand, their fingers intertwined. When they reached the barn and dismounted, he kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the moment. "I will court you properly, he promised. "With respect and patience. We will do this right." "I know you will," Elena said, smiling up at him. "That is who you are." The next weeks were some of the happiest of Elena's life. Samuel was true to his word, courting her with old-fashioned intentionality. He brought her wildflowers picked from the high desert, sat with her in the evenings reading poetry aloud, taught her to ride more confidently so they could explore the surrounding landscape together. They talked endlessly, discovering shared views and debating areas where they differed, learning the landscape of each other's thoughts and dreams. The physical aspects of their relationship remained carefully restrained. Samuel would kiss her goodnight before she returned to her cabin, hold her hand as they walked, but nothing that would compromise her virtue or his honor. Elena appreciated the respect, even as she sometimes wished he was less noble. The town's reaction, as predicted, was harsh. When Elena ventured into Circleville for supplies, she felt the weight of disapproving stares and heard the whispers that followed her. Women she had been cordial with turned away when she approached. Men looked at her with expressions ranging from pity to something more predatory, as if her supposed fall from grace made her fair game. Elena held her head high and ignored it all. She knew the truth of her situation, and that was enough. It was George Mitchell, the livery stable owner, who proved to be an unexpected ally. When Elena stopped by to arrange for grain delivery, he greeted her warmly and spoke loudly enough for others to hear. "Miss Norton, good to see you. Samuel mentioned you have been helping get his place properly organized. About time someone imposed some order on that chaos he calls a household." Elena smiled gratefully. "I am doing my best. He is lucky to have you. That man could not keep house if his life depended on it. Having someone competent managing things must be a relief." The pointed nature of his comments was not lost on the others in the stable. George was essentially vouching for the legitimacy of her employment, using his respected position in the community to push back against the more salacious rumors. "Thank you," Elena said quietly as he walked her out. "People in this town have too much time on their hands and not enough real problems to worry about," George said. "Pay them no mind. Anyone with eyes can see that Samuel Kincaid is a decent man and you are a respectable woman. What you two do with your lives is your own business." It was a small thing, but it mattered. And slowly, a few others followed George's lead. The Paiute family that Elena had defended in the trading post appeared at the ranch one afternoon with gifts of woven baskets and smoked fish, their leader speaking in halting English about gratitude and respect. A young couple new to town struggling with their own farm asked Samuel for advice and treated Elena with friendly warmth when they met her. Not everyone would come around, Elena knew, but she did not need everyone's approval. She just needed to know that she was living according to her own values and that the man she loved saw her as an equal partner. It was late August when Samuel proposed. They were working together in the garden, harvesting the first vegetables that had managed to survive Elena's novice farming attempts. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar brilliant colors, and the air had finally cooled from the brutal heat of midday. Samuel had been quieter than usual all day, and Elena had sensed something building in him, some tension or anticipation. When they finished filling the basket with vegetables and stood to return to the house, he caught her hand. "Elena, wait. There is something I need to ask you." She turned to face him, her heart beginning to race. "These past months with you have been the best of my life," Samuel said, his gray-green eyes intense and serious. "You have made this place feel like a true home, not just a house I live in. You challenge me and support me in equal measure." You make me want to be better, to build something worth leaving behind. I cannot imagine my life without you in it, and I do not want to try." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band that caught the fading light. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother sent it to me years ago, said I should give it to someone worthy when I found them. I have found her. Elena, would you marry me? Would you be willing to build this life with me as my partner in all things?" Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, absolutely, yes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, the stars were beginning to appear overhead. "I love you," Samuel said, the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "I love your courage and your conviction and your unwillingness to be anything other than exactly who you are." "I love you too," Elena replied, touching his face gently. "You gave me back my voice and then asked to hear it for the rest of your life. How could I possibly say no to that?" They married in late September, a small ceremony performed by a traveling minister who happened through Circleville. George Mitchell stood as witness, along with his wife Martha and the young farming couple who had befriended them. The Paiute family came as well, their presence a statement of solidarity that did not go unnoticed by the town. Elena wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Samuel wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut, and his boots polished to a shine. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her like he was sealing a sacred pact. The small gathering celebrated with food and music, and as Elena danced with her new husband under the clear autumn sky, she felt a completeness she had not known was possible. This was what it meant to be truly seen and valued. This was what love felt like when it was built on respect and equality. That night, when Samuel carried her over the threshold of the main house, no longer two separate residences but one shared home, Elena finally allowed herself to believe in happiness again. In the bedroom that was now theirs together, Samuel was gentle and patient, treating her like she was precious beyond measure. They came together with tenderness and passion, whispering promises and declarations, learning the geography of each other's bodies as they had learned the landscape of each other's hearts. In the quiet aftermath, wrapped in Samuel's arms with her head on his chest, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. The violence in the trading post that could have broken her had instead been the catalyst for transformation. The beating for speaking out of turn had led her to a man who told her voice mattered, and in doing so had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How strange life is," Elena said softly. "How the worst moments can lead to the best ones if you are brave enough to keep moving forward." "You are the bravest person I know," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "and I am grateful every day that you walked into my life." "Our life," Elena corrected. "We are building this together." "Our life," Samuel agreed. "Always." The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, subject to the whims of weather and market forces beyond their control. There were seasons of drought where they struggled to keep the cattle fed, winters where the cold seemed to penetrate to the bone, summers where the heat was relentless and unforgiving. But they faced it all together, Elena and Samuel, partners in every sense of the word. Elena proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding creative solutions to problems. Samuel's skill with horses and cattle, combined with his reputation for honesty, brought steady work and eventually expansion. They hired hands during busy seasons, and Elena made sure those workers were treated fairly and fed well, creating a reputation for the ranch as a good place to work. The town of Circleville slowly, grudgingly, came to accept them. It helped that Elena and Samuel lived so obviously well together, their partnership evident to anyone who saw them. It helped that they prospered while maintaining their principles, proving that success did not require cruelty or compromise. And it helped that Elena, when she did come to town, continued to speak up when she saw injustice, her voice now backed by the respect her husband commanded and the undeniable competence she displayed. She became known as someone who would help those in need, offering food to struggling families, teaching women to read, standing up for those who had no one else to defend them. Samuel supported her in all of it, proud of the difference she made even when it sometimes caused friction with the more conservative elements of the community. In the spring of 1880, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a mixture of joy and terror, memories of her mother's difficult births and the many women she had known who died in childbirth. But Samuel held her close and promised they would face this together too, that she would have the best care he could provide. The pregnancy was not easy. Elena suffered terrible sickness in the early months, able to keep down little food and losing weight that worried Samuel. But she was stubborn, refusing to be confined to bed, continuing to work in modified ways until her body simply would not allow it anymore. In late November, as the first snow began to fall, Elena went into labor. Samuel rode hard to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Ruth who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Samuel stayed at Elena's side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until he lost feeling in his fingers, whispering encouragement and love. When their son finally arrived, squalling and healthy, Samuel wept openly. They named him Jacob, after Elena's lost fiancé, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future. The baby had Samuel's dark hair and Elena's nose, and when he wrapped his tiny hand around his father's finger, Samuel looked at Elena with such profound love and gratitude that she felt her heart might burst. "Thank you," he whispered, "for him, for you, for this life we have built." "We built it together," Elena reminded him, exhausted but happy. "That is what makes it beautiful." Motherhood transformed Elena in ways she had not anticipated. The fierce protectiveness she felt for her son, the overwhelming love that consumed her, the bone-deep exhaustion mixed with moments of pure, transcendent joy. Samuel was a devoted father, taking on more than his share of care duties, walking the floor with Jacob at night so Elena could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every tiny development. As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, Elena watched him with wonder. He had his father's serious demeanor, but would break into brilliant smiles without warning. He was curious about everything, constantly exploring, and both parents had to stay vigilant to keep him out of trouble. When Jacob was 2, Elena became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1883 they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah after Samuel's lost sister Carolyn's middle name. Sarah was different from Jacob, more outgoing and fearless, climbing before she could walk properly and laughing at everything. The ranch prospered as the children grew. Samuel and Elena added more land, built a larger barn, increased their herd. They took on a permanent hired hand, a young man named Thomas Reed, who proved reliable and became almost like family. The children grew up riding horses before they could read, learning the value of hard work and the importance of treating all people with respect. Elena taught both children to read using the books she had collected over the years, supplemented by new volumes they ordered from catalogs. She told them stories about their grandparents, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Samuel taught them practical skills, how to care for animals, how to fix things that broke, how to read the weather and the land. When Jacob was 7 and Sarah was 5, a situation arose that tested the values Elena and Samuel had worked so hard to instill. A Paiute boy about Jacob's age had been accused of stealing from the trading post. The town was ready to run the family out, the old prejudices flaring up despite years of peaceful coexistence. Elena, hearing about the situation, investigated on her own. She discovered that the real thief was the son of a prominent rancher, a spoiled boy who had been stealing small items for months and letting others take the blame. When she presented her evidence to the town, gathered through patient questioning and observation, There was an uproar. The prominent rancher tried to dismiss her claims, to suggest she was lying to protect the Paiute family, but Elena stood firm and Samuel stood beside her, and this time others stood with them too. George Mitchell confirmed parts of her story. The midwife Ruth spoke up about the rancher's son's character. Even some of the other ranchers who had lost items and blamed it on drifters began to reconsider. In the end, the truth came out. The rancher's son confessed, shamed by the weight of evidence and the steadfast courage of a woman who refused to let an innocent child be punished. The Paiute family was exonerated, and while relationships remained complicated, it was a step toward justice. Jacob, watching his mother stand before the town and speak truth to power, learned something profound about courage. Sarah, too young to fully understand but picking up on the emotions, knew that her mother was someone special, someone brave. "Why did you do it?" Jacob asked that night as Elena tucked him into bed. "Everyone was angry at you." "Because it was right," Elena said simply. "Because that boy and his family deserve someone to speak up for them. Your voice matters, Jacob. Never forget that. When you see something wrong, and you have the power to speak against it, you have an obligation to do so." "Even if people get mad?" "Especially then," Elena said, smoothing his hair. "The easy thing is to stay quiet, to go along with injustice because speaking up is uncomfortable. But we do not choose the easy thing in this family. We choose the right thing." The years continued to roll forward, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. They lost friends to illness and accident, celebrated births and marriages, weathered economic downturns and natural disasters. Through it all, Elena and Samuel remained devoted partners, their love deepening with each passing year. When Jacob turned 16, he began courting a girl from town, a smart young woman who reminded Samuel powerfully of Elena at that age. Sarah, at 14, declared she wanted to be a teacher and began studying voraciously, preparing for the exams that would allow her to pursue that dream. Elena and Samuel, watching their children grow into thoughtful, principled adults, felt the satisfaction of knowing they had done something right. They had created not just a successful ranch, but a home where voices mattered, where justice was valued, where love was expressed through respect and partnership. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Elena back to the North Ridge where he had first told her he loved her. They rode the same path, though both were a bit older and more weathered now, their hands showing the calluses and scars of hard work, their faces marked by sun and time. They stood on the ridge watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, just as they had done 2 decades earlier. Samuel's arm was around Elena's waist, and she leaned into him, comfortable and content. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Samuel asked. "I remember everything about that night," Elena said. "I remember being terrified and hopeful in equal measure, not sure if I was being foolish or brave." "You were brave," Samuel said firmly. "You have always been brave." "We have been brave," Elena corrected. "Building this life took both of us." "I love you," Samuel said, as he had said thousands of times over the years, the words never losing their power. "I love who you are, who we are together. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for choosing this life with me." "I would choose it again," Elena said, turning to kiss him softly. "Every single time I would choose you and this life and everything it has brought us." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, they stood together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something lasting on a foundation of mutual respect and love. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on the porch of the ranch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Elena would sometimes think back to that day in the trading post. The blood on the floor, the pain and humiliation, the moment when everything could have broken her. And then Samuel's voice. "Your voice matters here." Those words had changed everything, had opened a door to a life she could not have imagined. They had led her to love and partnership, to children and grandchildren, to a legacy of courage and principle that would outlive them both. She had been beaten for speaking out of turn, but she had refused to be silenced. And in that refusal, in that stubborn insistence on her own worth and voice, she had found not just survival, but joy. Not just existence, but meaning. Samuel would reach over and take her hand, as he had done countless times over the decades, and she would squeeze his fingers gently. No words needed, just the comfort of presence, the security of partnership, the peace of a life well lived. Their story was not one of dramatic adventures or world-changing events. It was quieter than that, more personal. But in its own way, it mattered. Every time Elena spoke up for justice, every time Samuel supported her in doing so, every time they taught their children to value all people and stand against cruelty, they were making the world incrementally better. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. On a warm spring evening in 1903, Elena sat on the porch with Samuel, both of them in their late 60s now, their bodies worn but their spirits strong. Jacob ran the ranch now, with Sarah's husband helping during busy seasons. Sarah herself taught at the school in Circleville, beloved by her students and respected by the community. The grandchildren were visiting, 4 of them ranging in age from 3 to 12, and their laughter filled the air. Elena watched them play. These beautiful children who would never know a world where their grandmother's voice did not matter, where speaking truth to power was not modeled and encouraged. "We did all right, didn't we?" Samuel said, his voice a bit rougher with age, but still warm and familiar. "We did better than all right," Elena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We did exactly what we set out to do. We built something good." "We built something extraordinary," Samuel corrected, kissing the top of her head, "and it all started with the bravest woman I have ever known refusing to stay silent. It started with a good man seeing value where others saw only shame," Elena countered, "with someone who believed my voice mattered when I was beginning to doubt it myself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in those familiar, brilliant colors, surrounded by the evidence of their love and labor. The ranch stretched out before them, productive and prosperous. Their children were happy and principled, their grandchildren healthy and loved. It was, Elena thought, everything she had hoped for in those dark moments after the beating in the trading post. Everything and more. A life of meaning and purpose built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering love. Samuel squeezed her hand gently and she returned the pressure, a silent conversation they had perfected over decades together. "I love you. I am grateful for you. I would choose you again and again." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and the grandchildren were called inside for supper, Elena allowed herself one more moment on the porch, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling the solid presence of her husband beside her. She had been beaten for speaking out of turn, but she had refused to be broken. And in that refusal, in that stubborn insistence on her own worth and voice, she had found a love that sustained her, a partnership that elevated her, and a life that mattered. The cowboy had told her voice mattered, and together they had built a world where that was not just a comforting lie, but an absolute truth, where speaking up for justice was valued, where women were partners rather than property, where love was expressed through respect and equality. It was a legacy worth leaving, Elena thought, a story worth telling. And as she rose to join her family inside, Samuel's hand warm in hers, she felt profound gratitude for every choice that had led her here, even the painful ones, because all of this was worth every moment of struggle, every tear shed, every fear faced, every word spoken when silence would have been easier. Her voice had mattered, and it always would.